It's time to break down the X's and O's on Giants Rewind. What is this happy night here, a New York Giants podcast.
Welcome to the newest edition of the Giants Rewind podcast. John Schmeelk with you. Today we're joined by former Giants offensive lineman, Super Bowl champion, and part of our broadcast team, Diehl. But first, I need to remind everybody that you can find the Giants Rewind podcast along with the rest of our podcast selections on our Giants Podcast Network, which is presented by Investors Bank. It's on the Giants mobile app, on all your favorite podcast platforms, and at giants.com/podcast. We welcome in Diehl. And Dave, it's been a long time since we have been able to say this. For the second straight week, the Giants are in first place and control their own destiny to win the NFC East.
What an exciting time for this New York Giants organization and for this football team, because the ability for them to stick together through the adverse times and come together as a football team and hold each other accountable, you could see that reflection of this football team every time they step out on the football field. From start to finish, this is a group that goes out and fights and sticks together and is competitive from the start of the whistle to the end of the whistle. And when you get that and you're starting to see the results and the outcome of the effort put in and Joe Judge holding each player accountable, those are the types of things that show up when you win tough games on the road up against a physical outfit like the Seattle Seahawks. So the Giants are in a perfect position and controlling their own destiny. And that's what you want to do when you're in this position in December with 4 games left. You don't want to be a team sitting there in Week 17 going in thinking, we need to win, we need this team to lose, we need this team to win. I know firsthand that never works out for yourself. And the one game at a time pace, even though it's a cliche, that's what matters in the NFL, especially when we're talking about when you're sitting atop of the NFC East and everything's right in front of you.
Yeah, and Dave, obviously a lot of work still to do. Washington is playing good football. They beat Pittsburgh this week in Pittsburgh. Really a good win. So the Giants have to win games here down the stretch if they want to get into the playoffs. 7 is the minimum at this point if they want to get in, at least in my opinion. So let's talk about some greater themes first. And I want to focus on the defense first because, Dave, to me, the way this defense is playing is really impacting the approach to the game and the path to winning the Giants have kind of adopted. And I'll use the Seattle game as an example of this. You know, the Giants couldn't do anything offensively in the first half. They ran it for 32 yards, I think. They were under 3 yards per carry.
For 32.
Yeah, it was brutal, right? But at halftime, it's only 5-0. So you have the luxury then of being able to go out there in the second half, stick with the run game, actually go to bigger groups, bigger personnel. So the way this defense is played has really allowed this offensive staff to stick to the run and not put their young offensive line out on an island, protect your quarterback from turning the ball over. And it's really allowed them to figure out this path to winning, which are these close, low-scoring, defense, run game type of victories.
No question. It's called playing complementary football, and it's the exciting thing as you watch these games, or you play to the strength of your football team. And it's without coincidence that it is the Giants' defense. I mean, up front, the ability to have 4 run stoppers and 1 linebacker to stop the run sets up any defense for success, whether it's Leonard Williams, Delvin Tomlinson, Dexter Lawrence, Blake Martinez. They have a clear fit and a gap discipline on what their responsibilities are week in and week out based upon the discipline and the upcoming matchup they have with the opposing offense. And what do you always talk about? What's the best pass rush? It's having a solid secondary. What's the best pass rush combined with that? Is being able to have a secondary that can drop more into coverage where you're only rushing 3 or 4 and you're able to affect the quarterback. That's one of the biggest things that stood out for me when you're watching the Seattle game. The ability for 4 rushers to collapse the pocket and condense the pocket and not give any clear running lanes to a Russell Wilson is what led to the success on the back end. And then when the back end held up, it led for that split-second extra for the defensive line to be able to attack. So what you're seeing is systematically in Patrick Graham's defense, a group that believes in one another, that holds each other accountable, and aren't second-guessing or doubting the calls before the snap and what the diagnosis is when the play is going. That's something that takes time and experience. And when you have veterans going from Logan Ryan to the back end, to Blake Martinez, to Leonard Williams, everybody's on the same page when it comes to alignment and assignment. So it's very exciting to see the impact that this defense has had, and this is the type of defense that you have to have in order to make the playoffs. I know that this kills me to say it, but I wouldn't have 2 Super Bowl rings if it wasn't for the ability in Super Bowl 42 and those playoff runs and Super Bowl 46 and those playoff runs for our defensive line to be able to affect the quarterback to get that ball out a split second earlier and to create the takeaways on the defensive side of the ball. Those are all imprints right now that this defense has.
No, Dave, I'm with you 100%, and a lot to unpack there. So I'll start here because I'm with you. Against Seattle, what I thought was interesting, and I think at least I haven't seen this as much so far this year, where they were still bringing the slot corner, the linebacker, the safety, but when they did that, they would drop one of the ends, whether it was Jabal Sheard or somebody else into coverage. So while it might have looked like a blitz to a fan, really they're only rushing 4, which allowed them to keep those 2 safeties deep, play that shell coverage, not allow the big plays. And that, to me, was a change because the Giants have gotten pressure this year, but it's been assisted by some really clever blitzes. And I realize Seattle's offensive line was banged up and all that. I get that. But the fact that they're able to do it with 4 against Seattle was such a difference maker in the way they're able to defend the pass game.
Without a doubt, because when it's on third down like that, it becomes a numbers game, and the opposing quarterback just assumes the backside defensive end is going to be a rusher, and he doesn't compensate for him possibly being a dropper in his own coverages to where you could dump it off to your wide receiver on a quick slant because you know the pressure's coming from the opposite side, or you try to get it to the check down to the wide receiver just running possibly that wheel route. When you have that ability to make it a numbers game, and now all of a sudden you have a quarterback, even an experienced quarterback like Russell Wilson, confused, that's what is leading to success on that side of the football. And as I said, it's not only that, but maybe delayed blitz like the one that we saw from Tate Crowder where he scraped off of the inside stunt by the defensive line. Or how about, you look at Carter Coughlin's sack. He was looping around, but at the same point, he was almost playing the spy to make sure that Russell Wilson couldn't take off and utilize his legs in order to create more yardage and to get those first downs. When you systematically can interchange pieces and bring it from both sides, but at the same time drop players off into coverage where a quarterback isn't expecting it, that's where great things happen, and that's where swarming to the football like we saw in this game, once again, the tip drill, creates takeaways and it completely swings the momentum in game.
Yeah, no question about it. And the other thing I'll throw out there too, Dave, is look, Seattle, they're a passing team this year, but they have gotten more towards the running game in recent weeks. And Chris Carson can break tackles. He's a very good back. And the Giants were not forced, and this has been the case most of the year, to bring that extra defender into the box to stop the run. And Seattle, I don't think, committed to the run as much as they could have in this game. But that's another thing. We talk about the secondary, and to your point, Russell Wilson looked like he had to take a couple extra beat or two to figure out what the Giants' defense was doing. I thought we saw that with Tom Brady when the Giants played Tampa a few weeks ago as well. And those are two, that's not Brandon Allen we're talking about here. Those are two guys that have seen everything and are at the top of their game. And when you can start in that 2 safety shell and you have movable pieces that are versatile and can do a bunch of different things, you can go pre-snap to post-snap into any coverage you want out of that 2 safety shell. And it really gives Patrick Graham, Henderson, the defensive backs coach, all the freedom in the world to allow these players to use their intelligence, their skill set, their versatility to confuse these quarterbacks, which gives that defensive front time to get home.
Without a doubt, and that's something that has taken a little bit of time, but it's no coincidence that it takes time when you have new pieces out on the field. You thought going into the season it was going to be Jabril Peppers and Xavier McKinney, but then obviously with McKinney getting injured and out, then you're bringing another piece in Logan Ryan. So there was a lot of different interchanging parts that in the beginning of the season, systematically, you've got to keep it simple. But now to the point to where this Giants defense is, they don't show anything pre-snap. They can line up and show you one coverage and either run man out of it, they can run zone out of it, They can run different stunts in the blitz game. But the one thing that I love are some of the blitz packages they have to stop the run to make sure that there aren't any extra holes for a back like Chris Carson to be able to get through and to get those extra yards to put him in third and manageable. That's one of the reasons why Seattle started not getting away from just letting Russ cook and getting to the ground game was, number one, it started to expose their offensive line, but number two, their defense was out on the field the entire time. So when in the second half, you saw the ability of the defense to stop the run, and as we said, to finish the game with 190 yards rushing and only having 32 of those in the first half when the offensive line came out in the end of the third quarter and the fourth quarter and was able to bully them at the point of attack, and whether it was between, running 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, or 13 personnel, the Seattle Seahawks defense knew what plays were coming, and they still couldn't do anything to stop it. And when you started to control the time of possession and the pace of the game, it put their offense in the bind, because now systematically defense, you can play prevent, you can play the sticks, and it's forcing them to air it out much more and expose that offensive line that we saw gave up sacks in that game.
Yeah, Dave, I'm with you 100%. And they ran out of 13 personnel 10 times in the second half. The Gallman 60-yard run came out of 12 personnel. So they ran a lot of different ways. You mentioned the offensive line. I need to tip my cap to the tight ends, too. I thought Caden Smith and Toilolo and Evan Ingram did a great job blocking. Gallman was basically untouched on that 60-yard run, and they ran right behind Andrew Thomas and Caden Smith on that play. And I thought those guys did a great job at the point of attack, too.
I think they did a tremendous job, because the Seattle Seahawks defense knew that the run was coming, and there was nothing that they can do. And it wasn't anything complicated. It wasn't smoke and mirrors. It wasn't diversion or deception. It was running 2 or 3 tight ends, running duo right downhill, and then working to the edges by getting either 2 pullers out, whether it was the guard and tight end and pinning and pulling, or whether it was the center and guard, getting guys out in space to create clear running lanes for Wayne Gallman and Morris. And when you're able to do that and build the play action, which they were off of that, it allows a quarterback like Colt McCoy and the receivers to thrive and get open, because at that point the linebackers and that extra safety down in the box have to respect the run. And that split step up and that split second of hesitation allows your skill positions to get over the top.
2 more things on the defense, Dave, before we head over to the offense. Continue on the offensive side of the ball. I thought really that the key to this Giants defense this year is how assignment sound they've been. I've seen a lot of great defenses, even back in your day. Those Steve Spagnuolo defense, they were great. They were aggressive. They still allowed some chunk plays here or there, right? Because it was so aggressive. They took some chances. Some plays got made over the top. It was just the nature of how he coached. Yeah. But this defense, man, nothing ever gets behind this defense. The safeties are always where they need to be. Everyone is so assignment sound. There are just no blown assignments, and it blows my mind. I mean, you watch games around the league every week, and there are blown assignments here or there. The Giants never have any. It's amazing to me.
No, it really is. And, I mean, when you sit here and you look at the 20 takeaways, there's a reason why they're tied for the 3rd most in the NFL with that amount. It's because it's alignment and assignment. At this point, they know their responsibilities. They know that this is a bend but don't break defense. And as I said, systematically, when you're able to stymie the run on 1st and 2nd down, and now all of a sudden they're in 3rd and 7+, 3rd and 9+, it allows you flexibility to show numbers of walking linebackers up in the mugging in the A-gap, looking like you're going to shoot a safety off of the edge, and then dropping out systematically and only rushing 3 and still being able to collapse the pocket. Those are things I know for myself, being on the other side of the ball. It drives you crazy, because half of the time you're looking for work, you have linebackers and defensive lines that are getting their arms and their hands up into throwing lanes, and the quarterback's just sitting there patting the ball, looking for somewhere to go with it. When you're able to do that, like the Giants have been able to do that, and I've been one of those people that in the beginning I was a little bit worried about the adjustment of bringing over Leonard Williams. But I was happy the fact that they were moving him from a 3 technique compared to him playing a 5 technique of what he played in that Jets 3-4 system. He has been absolutely lights out. I mean, not only from a accountability and leadership factor by the way that he plays, but just his sound techniques and fundamentals, whether it's splitting the gap at 6'5", 300 pounds, and being able to twist and contort your body to get through and create that penetration, or his push-pull ability from getting that inside hand leverage. I mean, he has been a huge dynamic piece to this Giants defense, and it's not a coincidence that he's the NFC Player of the Week this year.
And it's funny, and you actually did a perfect transition for me here, Dave, is the last thing I want to ask you about on the defense is Leonard Williams, and this is why sacks are such a funny stat. You know, and Leonard Williams has had so many pressures, and he's basically on pace for the same amount of pressures this year that he's always had. He just is happening to get home this year. And I think last week was a perfect example. He had 2.5 sacks, right? Well, one sack came because Tay Crowder flushed Russell Wilson out right into him while he was getting blocked by an offensive tackle. Yep. Another one came because Jabal Sheard beat Chad Wheeler, who he dominated, by the way, in that fourth quarter. He killed him the whole quarter. And forced him to step up into the pocket where Leonard Williams was rushing. And then his third sack, or his 2.5 sack, however you want to look at it, came on a stunt where he was unblocked completely. So the guy gets 2.5 sacks, but it was such a team effort for him to get those. And it just shows how the sacks year in, year out can be such a fluky stat. And it's really hard to judge players by that number alone.
It really is. But, I mean, even with that said, look at the stat line and what he's been doing the entire season. You know, as I said, and you and I have done inside the film rooms where we've broken this down, his ability pre-snap to recognize whether an offensive lineman is light in his stance or if he thinks he's pulling or if he feels like he can jump an inside gap. You see him signaling to the linebacker so they're on the same page so that nobody blows an assignment in regards to what gap responsibility they have. You see him communicating pre-snap to the defensive lineman on the other side, and those defensive linemen now working in cohesion, whether they're running TEs or whether they're darting and looping off of one another on third down. Those are all things that take a veteran leader in order to be able to accomplish. And I know whether it's Coach Spencer or Coach Shear, you know, you see those guys out of practice with that big heavy bag around their body. As I said, his technique and his fundamentals with his hands this year are just as good, if not better, than any other defensive lineman I've seen in the NFL this year, and that's including Aaron Donald.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, David. And my point on the sacks wasn't to downplay how well he's been playing.
Not at all. I know that you weren't.
No, absolutely, because I think some of his pressures in the game, there was one play-action pass where he basically swam and overpowered two guys on a double team on the backside of a play-action fake where he pressured Wilson, and he just made some unbelievable plays this year. Absolutely right. I'm with you 100%.
And how about against the run when he's got a guard reaching him as he's playing that 3 technique? If he gets those arms inside and locked out, he's not getting moved off of the point of attack.
No question about it. Hey, Giant fans, I want to remind you, go get your Giants-branded debit card and Giants checking account from Investors Bank. With the Giants-branded debit card, security features, and discounts at the Giants online shop, you can earn up to $250 when you open an account at investorsbank.com/Giants. Member FDIC. Here's the other thing, Dave, that I think is important. You know, we saw early in the year the Giants take advantage of opponents that maybe were struggling a little bit. They went and played Seattle. We talked about how great the run game is already, but I think the next step for this team was going against a team and beating them in a phase of the game that was that team's strength. The Seahawks were the 3rd-ranked run defense in the league, and the Giants ran all over them. Yeah, the Giants didn't care. They did it anyway, and that's the sign of a team now that can be dangerous.
No question. I mean, in the second half, not only for the offense, but for Jason Garrett to believe and lean on the offensive line. I mean, that's an offensive lineman's dream to come out in the second half and run the football downhill the way that they did. And as I said, it wasn't with smoke and mirrors. It wasn't with deception. It was old-school football. Inside zone, duo, pull the trap, pull the kick out, and we're going to play a numbers game, and we're going to come right downhill at you. And as that game constantly pursued, they started imposing their will on that defense. And that's something that you love as an offensive lineman, and that's why you started to see those runs start to pop early on in the game. As we said in the first half, only 32 yards rushing. But now all of a sudden, as you're starting to get to the second level, as you're starting to feel them at the edge and you're starting to pin them inside, that's where you start getting those explosive runs. And it didn't matter whether Jamal Adams was in the box or not. They had him accounted for and had a body on a body. And I think that plays to the strength of the type of running backs they have. You know, when you look at the way that they've been running duo and getting all those double teams and mashes, it allows Wayne Gallman to pick his holes, get his foot in the ground, and get those gritty extra 2-3 yards per rush. Whether it's Morse, you want to give him more of a gap run. You want to give him more responsibility to where there's a pull or a kick out, and he's basically letting a linebacker pick and choose. Okay, you want to take it inside? I'm going to take it outside and allow my guard to work up to the second level. When you have that relationship now with the run game, with the offensive line setting up the blocks and the backs being patient enough to let him set up and then immediately hit the hole, it says a lot about the group and the camaraderie of them being able to lean on the offensive line. And it's no coincidence, as I said, when you started to get play action passing that was successful off of it, it was off of the same action, pulling the guards, having those same duo looks up front where you have everything fully secure. You get those two linebackers to eat up. Now you have one-on-ones on the outside, and that's the exact matchups that you want.
Last question, Dave, before we get to the Arizona Cardinals. And we got a call on Big Blue Kickoff, and I've seen some things online as well where some Giant fans are still concerned about the offense. They're not making as many explosive plays. You know, it's very conservative, a lot of curl routes and stuff like that. And the answer I gave to the caller on the show was, I think this is all by design, Dave. When you have a defense that's playing the way the Giants are, you don't want to put your offense in a situation where they're turning it over. And the more you throw it on early downs, you get into 3rd and long, then pass rushers can, tee off a little bit. You expose your offensive line. Your quarterback's more prone to mistakes. So I think this conservative approach on offense is, to your point earlier, complementary football to the way the defense is playing. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think this offense could be more explosive, but it might come at a cost of maybe more mistakes. And based on how this defense is playing, I think this is the way right now, to quote The Mandalorian, and this is the way you're probably going to go about winning games the rest of the year. And Giant fans shouldn't be concerned that this offense isn't trying to chuck the ball over the yard.
No, I wouldn't be concerned at all. And that's just, I think, a point in where we are in the NFL and in 2020 with all these fantasy numbers and people wanting high scores. Games are won and lost in the trenches, plain and simple. And when you're able to control the time of possession on the offensive side of the ball and be able to ground and pound and impose your will on the 3rd and 4th quarter, and your defense is fresh and able to get after the quarterback, that's all you're looking for, is to play complementary football and for a quarterback in Colt McCoy to manage it. We know that it's a lot different when you're running your offense with Daniel Jones and Colt McCoy. So with that said, you've got to play complementary football in order to get that done. And when you sit here and you're walking away from a game where we just talked about, where you out-bullied a bully on their home turf against the Seattle Seahawks, that's a win no matter how you look at it. And those are the wins that cost more than when you blow out a team by 14 points plus. Why? Because you know what it takes to earn and deserve the right to win up against a team where nobody picked you to win. Nobody thought that you'd be able to go on Seattle to do it. Now you're instilling the confidence in yourself, regardless of what the outside world is saying about your football team, because you believe you're a good team no matter what anybody says. So I know that people want to get more excited about throwing it and chucking it and airing it out downfield, but when you're winning football games and you consistently rush for over 100 yards and the defense plays this way, that's the success for winning, and that's the recipe for winning football games.
Now I'm with you, Dave. All right, let's look ahead here to the Cardinals. And there's similarities to Seattle, obviously. Mobile quarterback, a big wide receiver, Hopkins, Metcalf, things like that. But I've watched probably around 3 games of Arizona, this week, getting ready for this game. And to me, their offenses approach things in different ways. The Cardinals will try to make some chunk plays down the field, and they have a lot of those vertical routes, but they have not been a downfield passing team. It's much more underneath, quick game. Wilson runs a lot more, a lot of inside zone on the run scheme. So I do think, though, maybe the personnel is a little bit similar. This is a little bit of a challenge now. The Giants have been so great at stopping the big play. Well, now when you play zone, right, that underneath stuff can sometimes be available to other teams. And I think the Cardinals are, in a mode where they can take advantage of that with that really quick, short passing game that Kyler Murray likes to use.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I've watched a lot of Arizona Cardinals film this year, and especially going in to this week upcoming. So I agree with you. What you see is, in a baseball analogy, a lot of singles, a lot of home runs, but not a lot of doubles and triples.
Yes, 100%.
Everything's a short, intermediate passing game, or it's the deep routes to DeAndre Hopkins, and where they're systematically different in regards to the quarterback. I think they're going to see a different Kyler Murray this week playing up against the Giants, because I think they've systematically used him less the last 2 weeks to try to let his shoulder heal. And when he breaks outside of the pocket, different from Russell Wilson, he's looking to utilize those legs and get
Bingo.
huge chunks runs off of him, compared to where Russell Wilson's looking to get the ball out or get those extra yards and slide and get out of bounds. So this is where it's going to come to a team gang tackling and really rallying around the football. But being able to have that kind of blueprint last week, where they have a big dynamic receiver like they did in DK Metcalf, and the same type of thing with now DeAndre Hopkins and a mobile quarterback, it allows some of the same blueprint, but systematically you know that there's going to be interchanging pieces of what you want to do defensively, because you do want to be able to attack their offensive line, but you still need to maintain that gap discipline and corral the pocket around him, because we know that he is not the tallest quarterback, and that's where some of those throws where he can't plant and drive off of them sail up and across the middle.
No, I'm with you. And Russell Wilson, 7 interceptions this year, Dave, on intermediate throws in the middle of the field between 10 and 19 yards. Leads the NFL. So, to your point, that's not where they're looking to throw the football. And I sorted, and we're able to do this with some of the stuff I can do it via Pro Football Focus. I looked at all of Kyler Murray's passes or plays where he scrambled and they gained 11 or more yards. There were only 5 pass plays where he scrambled and threw the ball to gain more than 11 yards. And the only one that was a deep throw was that Hail Mary to Hopkins at the end of the Bills game. So you're right. When he scrambles, he's scrambling to run, not necessarily scrambling to pass. I'm with you, and I think we'll see more of that. There's design runs, too. They're the best red zone offense in the league. The Giants are going to be tested this week. Seattle was, too, but that running, his ability to run in the red zone for Arizona has been a huge factor this year.
It most certainly has, and you bring up a great point, because that's one of the areas where they struggled up against the Rams last week on third down. Why? 3rd and 9, 3rd and 11, 3rd and 10, 3rd and 14. They were all where you can play zone. You can systematically spy on them, and you don't give them those big running lanes and opportunities. And I think that's where they stopped the run with Kenyon Drake early and forced it into his hands to where you can drop off and where you can do those things to take away his ability to run the football. But as you said, when they get down in the red zone, how they roll them out or they bootleg and naked them, it is all to create half-field throws, half-field reads, 1-2, I'm off of it, I'm taking off with it. And that's what's helped aid them with their offense, because we know systematically their offensive line isn't one where they can drop back in 5- and 7-step drops and expect to come out without giving sacks.
No, I'm with you. I was surprised to see how much they run it on first down. They're like top 10 run percentage on first down. So they're going to try to get this run game established early. Drake's a good runner, and then they use Edmonds a lot in the pass game, and both guys can make big plays at any time.
Yeah, they most certainly can, but I think one of the reasons why they did that was because they were leaving Vance Joseph's 3-4 defense out in the field much too long, because they were going 3 and outs, because they weren't running the football and taking any time off of the clock. And then what's that do? It systematically puts on that defense where they want to walk around on third down, where we used to call it, whether it's bat, whether it's a spy look, where you have 5 or 6 guys walking around, so you're trying to pick and choose which players are going to blitz and come. And with that said, when they started systematically not being able to eat up the time of possession in the clock and having long sustained drives, that's where it absolutely killed them, when they were risking it trying to attack the opposing quarterback.
Final question, Dave. I have not watched their defense yet. I'm going to do that this afternoon when I'm off the phone with you. What should Giant fans expect from that Cardinals defense?
I think what they're going to expect out of this Cardinals defense, out of Vance Joseph, he runs a 3-4, a lot of movement by the defensive line. You're going to see a lot of slants, a lot of veers, a lot of movement from them up front to try to get the offensive lines on different levels. So you're splitting double teams or splitting zone blocks. And then, as I said, on third down, what you're going to be seeing systematically is guys walking around, whether it's Hicks, whether it's Reddick, whether it's Simmons, and then they have 2 or 3 guys up front. They're going to try to systematically play a numbers game so that they can attack the quarterback and get that ball out of his hands a split second earlier, because they haven't been able to hold up for a long period of time with Patrick Peterson and Kirkpatrick on the outside. But one thing before we break this Giants offense has to know what former Giant is on this Arizona Cardinals defense.
Marcus Golden, he's back.
Marcus Golden is back, and with that said, you know that they're going to have to switch around terminology. They're going to have to change, whether it's blocking stunts up front or protection calls. They're going to have to systematically change those things, because right now Marcus Golden this week is spilling the beans on as much information as he has.
Absolutely, and watch out for Budda Baker too. He's kind of that guy that plays in that robber position, Dave, and makes a lot of plays on the ball. No, he is. He is absolutely the replacement for Tron Matthew, no question.
He is a dynamic player, both in the run and pass, and whether it's in the blitz packages, whether it's in the run stunts that they have with him ripping off of the edge. He's their dynamic playmaker that sets the tone for them on the defensive side of the ball.
Dave, can't wait for it. It'll be a fun game. We'll see you on Sunday. Best of luck, bud.
Thanks a lot, John. Have a great one.
That's David Diehl, Always great insight for him on both sides of the ball and the matchup coming up against the Arizona Cardinals. For Dave, I'm John. A reminder, the Giants Podcast Network is presented by Investors Bank. You can find the archive of all of our shows at giants.com/podcast and the Giants mobile app and all our podcast platforms. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star positive review if you like what you hear. And of course, besides the Giants Rewind podcast, you have the Giants Huddle podcast, which is our long-form interview podcast with current Giant players and analysts around the league. And then, of course, Big Blue Kickoff Live. You can listen to it live on Giants.com and the mobile app every day at noon. We also put the archive up on those 3 platforms as well, so make sure you go check that out. That show is presented by the New York Lottery. For David Diehl, I'm John Schmeelk. Thanks for being with us on this episode of Giants Rewind. We'll see you next time, everybody. Stay safe.